All right, hi everybody. Today I'm going to be talking to you about my research on novel mechanisms to tune electronic characteristics in small molecule organic semiconductors that I'm working on in the Haley lab. So first, a little bit of background. Transistors are pretty pervasive in our society. They allow us to do some pretty amazing things with technology, including having you watch this video right now. Now, we think in the Haley lab that the inorganic semiconducting compounds that these transistors rely upon are somewhat outdated and not as efficient as they could be. So we're exploring organic semiconductors as a potential replacement for these. Now, organic semiconductors can be synthesized quite cheaply, energetically speaking, of course. They are modular, and that allows us to tune their electronic characteristics, which could allow us to tailor their applications and better increase in efficiency. Now, the Haley lab focuses on the indeno-1,2-B fluorene scaffold here, as you can see here, and that has a diradical character, which is pretty unique. It's a molecular possession of two unpaired electrons which interact to produce a single spin state, and this increased diradical character leads to favorable characteristics such as decreased HOMO-LUMO energy gaps, right? So if we decrease those gaps between those frontier molecular orbitals, we can increase the electronic characteristics, decreasing the amount of energy that's required to ultimately excite these and facilitating more efficient charge transfer through a transistor potentially. So what are some ideal characteristics, right? Well, we want to have a molecule exhibit high diradical character, right? Because we can decrease those HOMO-LUMO energy gaps. But we also want to facilitate efficient stacking in solid state. So you can have enhanced conductivity through orbital overlap or other physical characteristics. So that's really what we're looking for in an ideal organic semiconductor. So as we were talking about, the synthesis of these is pretty modular. We can have pi expansion, whereby we change the orientation of the terminal aryl units and have a variety of regioisomers. We can incorporate heteroatoms or heterocycles into these rings. As you can see, benzothiophene units incorporated here. And we can also modulate the aryl outgroups here to better facilitate these different electronic characteristics and tailor them to their application. So as you can see here, syn, indeno dibenzothiophene, is right here, and sen-benzofluorenofluorene is right here. So these are just a few examples of what we have done in the library of analogs that we've synthesized to investigate these properties. The one that I focused on was indeno dibenzothiophene, and we were really looking at if we could modify the terminal benzothiophene moiety, the bond fusion order or the direction of that, to change its diradical character. And as you can see here, this regioisomerism from anti-indecino-dibenzothiophene to syn-IIDBT, as it's so called, really did afford an increase in the Y value, or the diradical character. And that is essentially, if you can think about it in a little simplified term, of a percentage of how much the molecule exists in its open shell form. And we also decreased the singlet-triplet gap, which is also another indicator of what we were looking for. So the synthesis of this is pretty modular. You can start with a bis-triflated naphthalene unit and couple on a benzothiophene. And then from there, you can do a saponification, Friedel-Crafts acylation, and attack with an aryl lithiate of your choice. In this case, we use mesotyl bromide. And then you would get this diol that you can do reductive dearomatization with tin chloride to get your fully conjugated structure here. So this is syn-indeno dibenzothiophene. And some of the characterization that I did, now of course we talked about it as a diradical, so you're going to have these diradical centers here. Now these diradical centers are pretty highly reactive, and so what we did show or what I worked on showing was that if you don't protect these with these outgroups of mesotyl right here, then you can actually get proton or H dot scavenging with these diradical centers, and that can lead to this dihydro compound right here. So I was able to synthesize this, and you can see that the shifted Raman UV vis absorbance and redshifted UV vis absorbance corroborate that syn-indeno dibenzothiophene possesses a lower singlet triplet and anti-IIDBT, and also exhibits a higher diradical character. So you can see the NMR was produced here, and that indicates that we did synthesize this indeed. So my next project and one of my thesis was focusing on syn-anti-indocino-benzofuran benzothiophene, or IBFBT as we call it. Now, IBFBT is pretty interesting because it is asymmetric, and this scaffold also incorporates s-Indacene, which is a highly anti-aromatic compound. So not so much focusing on diradical character anymore, but more focusing on antiaromaticity as a potential benefit for organic semiconductors. Now, we incorporate heteroatoms and sulfonation locations around this s-Indacene core, but in this specific moiety, it's not been explored. And what's interesting is that IBFBT lacks symmetry on three fronts. Its fusion directions, we can see that this is syn, the benzofuran is syn, so syn benzofuran, and anti-benzothiophene, right? So you don't have the same direction of these heterocycles. And then we also don't have the same heteroatoms. We have an oxygen and a sulfur. And then not only that, but we don't have the same sulfonation locations, right? So we have one sulfone group here without obviously a sulfonation on an oxygen. It's not possible. So intriguingly, IBFBT might be able to act as a donor acceptor system because we have these regions of high electron density and low electron density, and that could exhibit push-pull characteristics, which may indeed further act as a mechanism to tune these electronic characteristics. So I was able to synthesize this. It's this beautiful blue color. I'll zoom in for you. Yeah, absolutely joy to synthesize. It's just a really beautiful compound. I was able to get some good characterization data from this. So we can see that going from the parent, this is the not sulfonated version, to the sulfonated version, we actually get a blue shifting UV vis absorbance. And then we can also see that we did in fact tune these HOMO-LUMO gaps, right? So from this parent compound, this is again syn-anti IBFBT to the syn-anti IBFBT sulfone, that's A and B, we did indeed decrease the gap between the HOMO and LUMO energy levels quite significantly, which is indeed pretty interesting. Now, I will point out that, right, this is a hybrid of two things. So we have anti-IDBT and syn-IBF, or IDBF, excuse me, which our compound here, which is syn-anti IBFBT is a hybrid exactly of, right? So we can see these core protons are pretty much the direct mean of these parent compounds, right? And that trend also holds when we look at the absorbance values, right? So 642 for the benzofuran version, 618 for the benzothiophene, and ours is right in the middle. Now, this is really interesting because we can also use potentially asymmetric sulfonation as a further mechanism to tune some of these electronic characteristics. So we're really excited to continue to work on the synthesis of a wide variety of these analogues and incorporate all of these different techniques that we've been studying, including asymmetric sulfonation and diradical character, to potentially identify properties, the ideal properties for an organic semiconductor. And we think we're pretty close. So thanks so much for listening. It was a pleasure to update you on my research, and I hope to talk to you soon. Thanks.